Hello, and welcome to Windows in Time, Jacksonville, Then and Now, a photo essay presented by Jackson County Library Services and the Southern Oregon Historical Society. I am Leah Pestizo, Digital Services Specialist. This program is being recorded. Please mute your microphone and turn off your camera to ensure quality recording. There will be a time to answer your questions at the end of the program. Jackson County Library Services acknowledges that its libraries are located within the traditional lands of the Shasta-Takelma and Lakawa people, whose descendants are now identified as members of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, as well as of the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians and Modoc Nation, who were forced to relocate to Oklahoma. We take this moment to recognize the Indigenous peoples whose traditional lands are where residents of Jackson County live today. JCLS is committed to fostering understanding, deep respect, and honor for Indigenous people, and we encourage you to learn more about the land you reside on. For more information, go to jcls.org/land. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Jackson County Library Services. And now I will hand it off to Larry to introduce our presenter today.
Good afternoon and welcome all. This is a very nice group here today, and we appreciate you coming, and we have a very fine presentation lined up. But before that, we also have a very exciting event coming up on April 29th and 30th from 11 to 3 is our annual Hamley Farm Heritage Plant Sale, and it's featured with a little blurb: plant a piece of history in your garden. There's 40 varieties of heritage plants that will be sold: lilies, peonies, iris, and asters. They're good, different plants for every time of year, sun or shade. And these are all locally, have a local provenance, which means, relatively speaking, they are deer resistant and drought tolerant. There'll also be a special exhibit on women in Rogue Valley agriculture that's there, and the entire event is free, although the plants are less so. Today, we are really happy to have Ken Gregg here. Ken is a professional photographer. He has been working with fine camera commercial art for all his life, and in a sense it began when he got his first Brownie camera at the age of 10. He's done extensive work in the Santa Barbara area, and his photographs are displayed internationally. We're really pleased to have him. Today's topic is Jacksonville Then and Now, a photographic essay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Ken Gregg, and I'm going to present to you Jacksonville Then and Now, a photographic essay. I'm sharing with you my view of Jacksonville as a photographer who has tried to capture not just what Jacksonville looks like today, but what life is like here. Peter Britt, the photographer, began to chronicle the people and places of Jacksonville in 1852. I'll be sharing with you his images and those of others from the past, alongside my own images taken in the past 10 years. These more recent images are an attempt to convey how I see Jacksonville in my mind's eye, focusing on people going about their daily business in town. So really, I'm offering a visual artistic lens more than I'm actually offering a history lesson. I would also like to acknowledge peoples, and that would be the Chinese immigrants who were brought or who immigrated to the area to work in the gold mines in the latter half of the 1800s. So, to begin, in spite of this presentation being titled Then and Now, I'm actually going to present things in the reverse, so to speak. I will start with a present building or place in Jacksonville that many here of you may be familiar with, then take you back in time to what the current scene would look like in the late 1800s and early 1900s. This should give you a sense of what was there, so the next time you visit the Good Bean, for example, you can see what it looked like as a saloon and billiard hall and envision its history. So to begin, this first set of photographs shows what Jacksonville was like as early as 1853 on the left and 1884 on the left. As what I'm trying to do is get the laser pointer. Here we go. Can you see that? Yeah. Over here, this little white building is actually the St. Andrew's Methodist Episcopal Church before the steeple was actually put on. In this little white road here leading up this hill, you can see on the right, it turns out to be the Jacksonville School. This area back here is where on the right you see the Jacksonville County Courthouse was built in 1884. And down in this area, excuse me, is where over on the right is the Table Rock Saloon, Billiard and Saloon, which is actually where Good Bean Coffee now resides. Let's see. So two men, James Cluggage and James Poole, who were given credit as the first to find gold in the area, filed land claims in 1852 on land that would become the town of Jacksonville. Additionally, Cluggage did something unheard of. Instead of keeping his find secret, he actually publicized it in the California newspapers. Thereafter, in a very short time, over 3,000 miners poured over the Siskiyou mountain range and into the Rogue Valley, scouring the area for gold, hoping to strike it rich. The miners were soon followed by wagon trains heading west along the Oregon Trail, guided by frontiersmen, some of whom boasted knowing more about the trails than they actually did, such as Stephen Meek, pictured here. One of the first businesses to follow on the heels of the miners were the saloons with gamblers, courtesans, and others eager to help free miners from whatever gold they found. Most of the early saloons, some barely more than tents or small shacks with little or no interior decoration, provided ample supply of liquor along with some kind of merchandise and entertainment. It is believed that the town had as many as 36 saloons during its heyday. The saloons also functioned as informal social and political headquarters and home to business deals, court decisions, and even trials. As time went on, the saloons provided increasing elaborate interiors. This photograph, thought to show the interior of the original Bella Union Saloon in 1867, where the Bella Union restaurant is now, represents the style of higher-end saloons in Jacksonville as the rough mining town was transformed into the hub of Southern Oregon. One could claim the peak in saloon decor was the 1912 Marble Corner Saloon at the corner of Oregon and California streets, where Shuffle Toys was in business for the last 2 generations, and which is now the Happy Alpaca store. Starting with the story of one of the town's longest running saloons, the Eagle Brewery Saloon began as a brewery, actually, near the corner of Oregon and California streets. Joseph Wetterer bought the brewery and moved it a few blocks south to where it still exists today. 2 years later, in 1861, Wetterer built a large beer saloon with direct street access in front of the brewery. He ran the business for 18 years, boasting that he served, quote, the best lager beer in Southern Oregon, unquote. Unfortunately, he died prematurely in 1879, leaving his wife, Frederica, to run the brewery and saloon, which was an unusual career in those days for a woman to run what was considered to be strictly a man's business. Here is a bar tab from the day, actually dated October 15th, 1879, for drinks purchased but not paid for by a local George Holt, who was a prominent brick mason who built many of the town's historic structures. Frederica eventually closed the Eagle Brewery Saloon in 1892. The property, owned by her children after Frederica herself died, was labeled, quote, dilapidated, unquote, on local survey maps. Her daughter Daisy held the property until the early 1950s, when she eventually sold it. In 1960, artist Eugene Bennett, a local resident originally from Central Point, purchased the property. He restored the saloon, turning it into his residence and painting studio. Over the next 50 years, he became a nationally known artist and helped create the Rogue Valley and Art Center in Medford. Bennett died in 2010, and 2 years later, my partner and I purchased the residence and made it our primary home. So there's now, and there's the before. One of the other significant saloons in Jacksonville was opened in the building where the Good Bean Coffee now exists. Known as the Table Rock Billiard Saloon after the original name of the town, which was Table Rock City. Business partners joined Winchon and Herman Helms, built the current arcade-style brick building in 1865. The saloon became a Jacksonville institution for the next 50 years, in part because the saloon was also Jacksonville's first museum, with what was called the, quote, Cabinet of Curiosities, a collection of items designed to attract clientele that then stayed for the saloon's lager. An early inventory list of this Cabinet of Curiosities included the first piece of gold found in Jackson County, a mastodon tusk found on Applegate, pioneer firearms, oddities of nature, and an extensive mineral and coin collection. Helms ran the saloon until his death in 1899, followed by his son Ed operating it until his retirement in 1914. When the saloon closed, the Cabinet of Curiosities boasted a collection of items valued at $50,000. Most significant is that many of the relics became part of the core of Southern Oregon Historical Society's initial collection of artifacts. Still offering drink of a different sort, the Good Bean Coffee operates in the building with a long storied history of more, hold on, I lost it here. There, then and now. There we go. So soon after the establishment of the early saloons came the churches, as the number of rowdy patrons and unseemly entertainment began to alarm some of the more conservative residents of the town. One of the earliest of these churches was a St. Joseph Catholic Church, which was dedicated November 1st in 1858, and was the first parish church built in Southern Oregon to serve the Catholic population, and is the oldest Catholic church still standing in the region. The church was consecrated by Archbishop Francois Norbert Blanchet, a noteworthy missionary, author, and one of the first two priests to come to Oregon, arriving as early as 1838 with the Hudson's Bay Company during its expansion into the Pacific Northwest. His nephew, pictured here, Reverend Francis Xavier Blanchet, became the parish priest, where he remained in service to the Catholic community for the next 25 years. There's the Joseph Catholic Church now and then. We now come to the new Presbyterian Church, completed in 2006. This new church was the result of the Presbyterian congregation growing so large that the original historic church could no longer accommodate the number of worshipers. This is the original historic church during Jacksonville's 2014 citywide yard sale, with the proceeds going toward supporting the Presbyterian mission projects in Mexico. This church, located at the east end of town, was constructed in 1881. The design may have been inspired by one of the architectural pattern books popular at that time. A 1,000-pound bell from San Francisco and a stained glass windows from Italy enhanced this Victorian Gothic style church. After its completion, it was eulogized in journals and newspapers as, quote, a model of architectural beauty and the most ornate and handsome church in Southern Oregon. Reverend Moses Williams, the local Presbyterian minister, worked to establish the church with William Hoffman, who came across the Oregon Trail in a covered wagon with his wife and 6 daughters in 1853. Cornelius Beekman, the town banker, who married one of Hoffman's daughters, donated the land and paid for half the $6,000 construction cost. Another local, George Holt of the bar tab story mentioned earlier, provided the masonry and bricks for the foundation. Presbyterian Church, now and then. Going to the west side of town, many of you are familiar with the Britt Music and Arts Festival that occurs every summer in Jacksonville. What many of you may not know is the Britt Festival takes place on the land formerly owned by one of the early settlers in Jacksonville, known as Peter Britt. He was a Swiss-born pioneer arriving in Jacksonville in the fall of 1852 with a 2-wheel cart of photographic equipment and $5 in his pocket. He filed a donation land claim on acreage of what is now the Britt Music and Arts Festival grounds, the Lower Britt Gardens, and a portion of the Jacksonville woodlands. After trying his hand at gold mining and running a pack train, he opened up Peter Britt's photograph and daguerreotype room in 1856 in a small studio he built that doubled as his residence. Eventually, he built a 3-storied home with 14 rooms, a large wine cellar, attached solarium, and extensive, elaborate gardens. He moved his workspace and gallery into the main house and tore down the original small studio. Eventually, Britt became best known and most popular in southwestern Oregon and northern California for his photographs of people, activities, and landscapes, both photographed and painted. Note that the image on the far right is actually a painting, and it looks so similar to the original photograph at the start. He is also remembered as the person who took the first successful photographs of Crater Lake, and his photos helped persuade Congress to make Crater Lake a national park in 1902. He was a man of many interests and is credited with founding Southern Oregon's vineyard, orchard, and commercial horticultural industries. Today, we would call Peter Britt a Renaissance man. After Britt's unmarried children passed, the house and grounds began to fall into ruin. After much neglect and damage from an earlier flue fire, the entire house burned down in 1960, a tragic loss for the town's history. Within a year after Britt's house burned down, Portland conductor John Trudeau visited Oregon with the dream of starting a music festival. The former hillside estate of Peter Britt, with its amazing acoustics, was perfect for the outdoor concerts. Volunteers erected makeshift stage of plywood under a canvas awning and lit by strings of tin can lights. A small chamber orchestra was assembled, and the Northwest's first summer outdoor music festival was born. giving its first concert in August 1963. 14 years later, in 1977, the new pavilion was constructed and is still in use today. Over time, the festival came to offer 4 months of various genres of music, including 3 weeks set aside for the classical and orchestral performance. Then, now and back then. Back to the center of town, the corner of California and 3rd Street is the site of one of the first banks in Southern Oregon, founded by Cornelius Beekman, another key Jacksonville pioneer. Cornelius Beekman started as an express rider in 1853, carrying gold, mail, and newspapers over the Siskiyous to Wairika 2 to 3 times a week, a 67-mile journey by horse. He went on to open his own express company in a building where Umi Sushi Restaurant now stands. Then in 1863, he became a Wells Fargo agent and constructed his second bank building across the street, which still stands to this day. He operated this bank for another 52 years with the help from his cashier, Henry Docks, there at the left, who joined the bank in 1903. Docks was also a justice of the peace, and marriage license records show him performing weddings in the bank in both 1911 and 1912. He operated, where am I here? During Jacksonville's heyday in the late 1800s, some $400 million in gold reportedly passed across his counters. That's worth about $1 billion in today's dollars. Cornelius Beekman, probably Jacksonville's wealthiest pioneer, was not only a prominent businessman, he was also a public servant, having served on the school board and as town trustee and mayor, and donated land for churches and schools and libraries. He built his 1.5-story Gothic Revival style home for his wife and 2 children, finishing it in early 1870s. The house was part of what was called Millionaires Row, which started for several blocks on East California Street. Its lack of pretension reflects the modesty that was a hallmark of the mid-Victorian era when ostentatious was frowned upon. Cornelius Beekman finally closed his bank in 1950, the year he died. The Beekmans were the only family who occupied the house, accumulating objects and furnishings over a period that spanned the mid-Victorian era to post-World War II. When the last family member died, ownership of the house eventually went to the city of Jacksonville. It is now a museum also, open for tours and historical events relating to the Victorian period. Beekman Bank, now and then. Moving up California Street, this building at 157 East California Street is currently the home of Rebel Heart Books. In wait a minute, in 1874, George Schumpf erected the 1-story arcade building. Sorry, I'm a little ahead of myself. Here we go. Originally, at one time, it was occupied by the post office, Miller's General Store, and Murphy's Barber Shop, with a fanciful appointed interior. The barber shop was the longest continuous type of business in Jacksonville, beginning as early as 1859. One of the town's many barbers was George Schumpf. In 1874, Schumpf built the 1-story arcaded brick building in the previous slide that still stands. He was the first town barber with training, having apprenticed for 4 years in France. By 1878, Schumpf had gone mine crazy, quote unquote, according to a grandson, purchasing what was supposed to be a bonanza of the first magnitude, That did not prove to be the case. And by 1885, Schimpf had to sell his shop and his home, though he continued to be very popular town barber until he died in 1897. In 1907, the barber shop is in its current location, which happens to be in the brick building right next door to where it was in the early 1900s. Murphy's Barbershop now and then. East of the town's commercial district lies a property known as Bingham Knoll, a 7-acre piece of land that was the location of one of Jacksonville's earliest schools. Beginning in 1867, the school district directors approved the purchase of the property at the east end of E Street and converted an existing 2-room house into a school building, which was enlarged a year later in 1866 to accommodate more students. The building served 3 generations of students over 36 years. The teachers who worked there had to abide by a list of very strict instructions. Most notably is instruction number 6, which reads, "Women teachers who marry or engage in other unseemly conduct will be dismissed." And instruction number 7, which states in part, quote, "Every teacher who smokes or uses liquor or gets shaved in a barbershop will give good reasons to suspect his worth, intentions, integrity, and honesty." Subsequently, a 5-year room brick structure was built in the place where the wooden schoolhouse burned down. But 4 years after that, this fireproof brick structure was also totally destroyed by fire. Within a year, it was replaced by the existing brick structure, which served as a school until 2007 when it closed. It was purchased and developed by Mel and Brooke Ashland, who took care in converting the former school into offices and a German restaurant while preserving the interior as much as possible. Besides the former schoolhouse at the left, you will notice a red train engine sitting at the end of rows of grapevines. This leads to the story about the train station in Jacksonville, which is now the town's visitor center and chamber of commerce and the starting point for the Jacksonville trolley tours. The history of this train station goes back to 1884, when what was to become the first in a series of events that led to the near demise of Jacksonville, the Oregon and California Railroad bypassed Jacksonville in favor of Medford and the Flat Valley floor. Without any train service, the town struggled to retain its role as the hub of Southern Oregon commerce, government, and social life. So residents funded a 5-mile spur line to connect the city to the main railroad in Medford. In May of 1891, the Rogue River Valley Railway's small steam locomotive, engine number 1, the very same one that now sits on the Bingham Knoll property, pulled into the newly constructed Jacksonville Depot, which is at the corner of North Oregon and C Streets. Nicknamed Dinky, the Peanut Roaster, the Tea Kettle, and the Jacksonville Cannonball, for its small size, for not being able to stay on the tracks, and for its lack of reliability due to constant mechanical failure, it had trouble from the start. Engine number 1 soon proved too underpowered to haul the heavier freight loads up the 3% grade from Medford, so it was relegated to passenger service only, pulling a single Pullman car, pictured in the far right at the back. With the rail service failing, in 1899, William Barnum bought the railroad from the Rogue River Valley Railway Company for about $12,000. Barnum ran the trains with the help of his 2 sons. His 13-year-old younger son, John Barnum, became the youngest train conductor in the nation, who continued to work for his father for another decade. Barnum continued to run the train service until he sold it in 1915. The railroad survived another 10 years under the new owners until 1925, after which it was eventually dismantled. The train station, then and now. The depot still stands, although it was turned 90 degrees clockwise from its original orientation at some point. And pieces of the original rails can still be seen embedded in the asphalt west of C Street between Oregon and 3rd Streets. Turning to the subject of the city government, you may be familiar with Old City Hall, where the Jacksonville City Council meetings were held for over 140 years, the oldest government building in Oregon to remain in continuous use. It stands at the intersection of South Oregon and Main Streets. The bricks used in its construction came from a general merchandise store in the same location that was gutted by a fire in 1874. To the right of the building was what became the location of the first Chinatown in Oregon, located along West Main Street. Originally, this was the town's commercial center, but as business relocated to California Street in the 1850s, the block became home to hundreds of Chinese workers brought to Jacksonville by labor bosses to work the gold mines. But as the gold played out, the Chinese quarter was gradually abandoned. In 1888, most of what were by then derelict buildings burned in one of Jacksonville's many fires. Today, the area is now where Elan Guest Suites, Gogie's Restaurant, and the town's Veterans Park can be found. Old City Hall is at the far left. Old City Hall, now and then. The Old City Hall building also contained Jacksonville's first fire hall at the south end of the building, there on the left. It is now a museum housing Jacksonville's original hook and ladder wagon. The town's volunteer fire department in front of the two-story Masonic Hall responded to the call of Applegate Fire Bell well into the 1950s. With major fires destroying portions of the town from 1867 through 1888, insurance companies penalized owners of wooden structures and owners of buildings adjacent to wooden structures with such high fire insurance rates that they were forced to construct any future buildings with brick starting at 1878 and on. Let me replay that to you. There is the burned section of the block between Oregon and 3rd Street. And there it is rebuilt today. Around 1995, the old brick building at 3rd and C Streets that had housed the city offices for 40 years was remodeled into a new fire station. In 2022, the fire station was totally rebuilt as a two-story modern structure. The other main historic government building, besides Old City Hall, is what was the former county courthouse. The original wooden structure on North 5th Street was built in 1859, but by 1880, a grand jury called it, quote, dilapidated and a disgrace to the county, and condemned it. That is just a sketch of what it looked like. 3 years later, the county commissioners approved plans for a new building. They determined that they wanted a two-story brick structure, 92 feet by 60 feet, with 14-foot ceilings, which is exactly how it was built. When finished at the cost of approximately $32,000, it was declared the crowning glory of Jacksonville. It housed the offices of the county clerk, recorder, the treasurer, the sheriff, and sheriff's deputy, and the county judge, whose courtroom occupied the entire second floor. However, this crowning glory was, quote, almost too little too late. As mentioned earlier, when the railroad bypassed Jacksonville in favor of placing train service in Medford, Jacksonville waned. Many attempts were undertaken to relocate the county seat to the new business and residential hub of Medford. Finally, in 1927, in what was to become the second in a series of events that led to the near demise of Jacksonville, the county seat was moved from Jacksonville to Medford. The iconic two-story brick building then stood empty until 1950, when the Southern Oregon Historical Society converted it into a history museum. But in 2010, the county, which still owned the courthouse building, closed the museum and sold the building to the city of Jacksonville. The city subsequently refurbished and retrofitted the structure and moved its offices into the first floor in 2019. And several years later began holding city council and other meetings in the second-story courtroom. Jackson County Courthouse now and then. Up the hill, east of New City Hall, lies the Jacksonville Historic Cemetery. Its 32 acres currently contain over 5,600 grave sites divided into 7 different sections representing religious and fraternal organizations, as well as the extensive city section. It remains an active cemetery and is registered as part of Jacksonville's National Historic Landmark status. It's one of the oldest cemeteries in the Pacific Northwest and one of the few that has remained in continuous use since being dedicated in 1860. It contains some of the earliest pioneer grave sites in all of Southern Oregon. The particular cemetery block here belongs to the Ish family. Jacob Ish sold his Virginia plantations and came west with his wife and 4 brothers to avoid the Civil War. Over his lifetime, Jacob Ish became one of the largest landowners in Jackson County, including the site of the present Rogue Valley Medford International Airport. To help maintain this historic cemetery, the Friends of this Jacksonville Historic Cemetery conduct tours, marker cleanup days, and put on what's known as Meet the Pioneers. Each October, scattered throughout the headstones, players in period dress greet tour groups and reenact actual stories of early pioneers as they traveled west to Oregon and what happened to them as they settled in Jacksonville and the Rogue Valley from the mid-1850s to the early 1900s. Jacksonville Cemetery now and then. Circling back to the downtown area and what was to become the third in a series of events that led to the near demise of Jacksonville, the Great Depression followed by World War II left the town all but abandoned with less than 700 residents. During this period, it can be said that the town actually had a second gold rush. The easy gold had run out by the late 1860s, but when the Depression hit in the 1930s, Jackson County issued mining permits as an alternative to going on the dole. Much of Jacksonville was undermined, literally, including behind the Presbyterian Church and in the current post office parking lot. Most found sufficient gold to live on, and to this day, Jacksonville continues to experience sinkholes in the town when these old mining shafts collapse. Well into the 1960s, Jacksonville was still the wrong side of the tracks, and businesses and residences became vacant and dilapidated, but at least also affordable housing was available. In the mid-1960s, a resident, Robbie Collins, organized a major protest with other locals when the Oregon Department of Transportation, I hit the mouse, pardon me. There, organized a major protest with other locals when the Oregon Department of Transportation decided to route State Highway 238 directly through the town, tearing down 11 buildings, historic buildings, in the process. The state relented, but challenged the residents to do something with the buildings. This initiated the restoration of Jacksonville and its establishment as the first West Coast group of buildings on the National Historic Landmark Register. The individuals leading the effort formed the Jacksonville Boosters Club, one of the most active civic volunteer organizations in the state, which will be celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. In spite of its near demise from the railroad bypassing Jacksonville, the county seat moving to Medford, and the proposal to run a highway through the town, Jacksonville not only survived, but has become a vibrant community and a popular tourist attraction. So, to sum up, my purpose for this presentation has been to give you a feeling for what it's like to live in history, so that the next time you go to a restaurant, attend a concert, or shop in Jacksonville, you will experience what you've seen today in a much richer way. You will have your own walk through and in history. Dates, locations, and photographer of some photos are not accurately known, in which case best guesses were made or left blank. My information source for much of my commentary is Historic Jacksonville Inc.'s website, which I encourage you to explore. Check out the history trivia, pioneer profiles, blogs, and videos, not to mention all of the programs and events that bring local history to life. So most of the historic images are courtesy of the Southern Oregon Historical Society and Southern Oregon University digital archives. The images of what life in Jacksonville looks like today are from my book, A Year in Jacksonville, which is available in Jacksonville at Rebel Heart Books and Art Presence Arts Center. For more historic photographs, please visit the permanent exhibit of over 70 photographs I produced that are in the main hallway of New City Hall.